The Meridian Hope moved through the darkness of space like a whale swimming through a calm ocean, steady and peaceful, carrying 300 souls toward their new home. Among distant stars, Captain Lucas Grant stood on the bridge and watched the stars streak past on the view screen. Each point of light a reminder of how far humanity had come in just 2 generations since making contact with the wider galaxy. And he felt proud to be part of this expansion into the frontier territories. All systems running smooth. "Captain," said the young navigator at her station. Her fingers dancing across holographic controls, Lucas nodded and smiled, thinking about the families in the passenger sections below, children laughing in the recreation areas, parents planning their new lives on Haven Colony, where soil waited to be farmed and cities waited to be building. Section C of the passenger deck. Emma Walsh sat with her daughter Sophie on a cushioned bench near the large viewing port, where stars glowed like diamonds scattered on black velvet. "Mama, look how many stars there are!" Sophie pressed her small hands against the transparent barrier. Her 6-year-old face filled with wonder. Millions and millions. "Sweetheart." Emma ran her fingers through Sophie's blonde hair and pulled her daughter close. Breathing in that sweet child smell of shampoo and innocent, Sophie turned and looked up at her mother with bright blue eyes that always seemed to see more than they should. More than any child her age ought to notice about the world and its hidden sorrows. "Will Daddy be waiting for us when we get there?" Emma felt her heart squeeze tight in her chest because Sophie's father had gone ahead 6 months earlier to help prepare the colony. And the waiting had been hard on both of them, but especially on this little girl who asked about him every single day. "Yes, baby. He'll be there at the landing pad waiting to scoop you up in his arms." Sophie giggled and went back to watching the stars. Her imagination already painting pictures of their new home with its purple grass and 2 moons that hung in the sky like guardian angels down the corridor. Other children played games in the common area under the watchful eyes of volunteer supervisors while parents rested or socialized, or studied information about their destination. World Commander Kyle Morrison walked his regular patrol route through the ship, his hand resting comfortably on his sidearm, though he expected no trouble on this milk run assignment. Just peaceful families heading toward peaceful futures. Was a tall man with gray starting to show at his temples and a kind face that had seen enough combat in his younger days to appreciate the value of boring routine patrols where nothing ever happened. Commander, one of his security team members approached with a datapad. "Just completed the weapons inventory like you asked? Everything secure and accounted for. Good work." Daniels. Kyle took the pad and signed off on the report, knowing that their small arsenal of defensive weapons would be useless against any serious threat, but regulations required armed security on all civilian vessels on the bridge. An alert chimed softly, and the sensor officer leaned forward to study her console with a slight frown creasing her forehead. "Captain, I'm picking up some unusual readings on long-range scan. Could be ion trails from ship engines, but the signature is weird, not matching any known civilian traffic patterns." Lucas moved to stand behind her station and studied the data streaming across multiple screens. His years of experience telling him something felt wrong, even though nothing concrete showed itself in the numbers. Distance? Hard to tell with the interference from that nebula we passed 2 hours ago. But if I had to guess, maybe 15 million kilometers and closing. Keep tracking it and let me know if anything changes. Lucas returned to his command chair, but the peaceful feeling from earlier had evaporated. Like morning mist under a hot sun, hours passed, and the unusual readings grew stronger and multiplied as if more ships had joined whatever was out there in the darkness. Beyond their sensor range, Lucas called a meeting with his senior officers in the small briefing room just off the bridge. Their faces reflected his own growing concern. Could be a merchant convoy, suggested the chief engineer. A stocky woman named Carol Peterson, who had worked on civilian ships for 20 years and preferred to think the best of people. Merchant ships don't travel in formation like that. Kyle Morrison crossed his arms over his chest, his military training making him see threats where others saw coincidence. And they don't maintain perfect radio silence. What are you suggesting, Commander? I'm suggesting we change course and put some distance between us. And whoever is following us. Lucas considered the options and weighed them against the delay it would cause to their schedule. But something in his gut told him to listen to Kyle's instincts. Helm. Plot a new course, 20 degrees starboard. Increase speed to maximum safe velocity. The Meridian Hope adjusted its trajectory and pushed its engines harder. But the mysterious contacts adjusted their course to match and began closing the distance with alarming speed in passenger section C. Emma noticed a slight change in the ship's vibration as the engines increased power and wondered what it meant, but told herself not to worry because worrying never helped. Anything Sophie felt it too and looked up from the picture she was drawing with crayons on a digital pad. Mama, why is the ship going faster? Maybe we're in a hurry to see Daddy. Emma forced brightness into her voice and hugged her daughter close on the bridge. The situation deteriorated rapidly as the sensor officer's voice rose with tension. Captain, multiple contacts breaking stealth. Count is 12 vessels. They're accelerating hard. ETA to intercept is 8 minutes. Lucas felt ice water replace the blood in his veins, but kept his voice steady and calm. Battle stations. Send out distress signals on all frequencies. Civilian vessel under attack, requesting immediate assistance. Alarms blared throughout the ship, and emergency lights began, flashing red as automated systems sealed bulkhead doors and pressurized all sections. Parents grabbed children and rushed toward designated safe areas while crew members ran to their emergency posts with practiced efficiency. Emma scooped Sophie into her arms and ran with the other families toward the reinforced shelter in the center of the ship, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Kyle Morrison gathered his security team and distributed weapons, knowing they were about to face something far beyond their capacity to handle, but determined to protect the innocent lives aboard this ship or die trying. The unknown vessels dropped their stealth completely and appeared on the view screen like wolves emerging from shadows, their hulls dark and covered with weapon ports that made their intentions crystal clear. There's Zareth, breathed the tactical officer, her face going pale as she recognized the distinctive ship designs. Pirates, slavers. Lucas gripped the armrests of his command chair until his knuckles turned white because everyone in human space knew about the Zareth and their brutal reputation for capturing ships and selling entire crews into slavery across the lawless regions of the galaxy. Evasive maneuvers. Give me everything the engines have got. But the Meridian Hope was a civilian transport, built for comfort and cargo capacity, not speed or combat. And the Zareth ships were predators designed for exactly this kind of hunt. Green energy beams lanced through space and struck the Meridian Hope's engines with surgical precision, not destroying them completely, but crippling them enough to leave the ship helpless and drifting. The lights flickered and gravity fluctuated for a moment before emergency systems stabilized everything. But everyone aboard knew their situation had just become desperate. Lucas activated the ship-wide communication system and tried to keep his voice steady, even though fear threatened to choke him. This is the captain. Remain calm and follow all emergency procedures. Help is on the way. But he wondered if help would arrive in time or if anyone would even hear their distress call in this remote sector of space. The Zareth ships surrounded the Meridian Hope like sharks circling wounded prey and began moving into boarding positions. The first boarding pod hit the Meridian Hope's hull with a metallic clang that echoed through every corridor and made the children in the shelter scream. With Firema held Sophie tighter and whispered soothing words that felt like lies on her tongue, because nothing about this situation would be okay, and every parent in that cramped shelter knew it. Commander Kyle Morrison positioned his security team at key choke points throughout the ship. 15 men and women with light weapons against an unknown number of hostile aliens who live for violence and cruelty. Remember your training. Kyle spoke into his comm unit as he checked his rifle one final time. Protect the civilians at all costs. Fight smart and watch your corners. The boarding pods began cutting through the hull with plasma torches that glowed white-hot and filled the corridors with the smell of burning metal, and Ozone X-Earth warriors poured through the breaches like ants flooding from a kicked nest. Their bodies covered in thick scales that served as natural armor, their faces twisted into expressions of savage joy. They stood 7 feet tall on digitigrade legs that ended in clawed feet, and their arms were long and powerful with hands that could crush human bones like dry twig skeles. Team opened fire from defensive positions, and the corridor lit up with muzzle flashes and energy beams. Several Zareth went down screaming, but more kept coming in a seemingly endless wave. Fall back to secondary positions, Kyle ordered as his team members began taking casualties, and the Zareth pushed forward with overwhelming numbers down in engineering. Carol Peterson tried desperately to restart the damaged engines, but the Zareth had been too precise in their attack, and every system she brought online immediately failed again. Damn it! She slammed her fist against the control panel and fought back tears of frustration, because she knew what happened to people captured by slavers, and the thought of those children suffering that fate made her want to scream on the bridge. Lucas watched helplessly as Zareth warriors cut through his crew's defensive lines and moved deeper into the ship with brutal efficiency. Captain, they've breached sections D through F. Our people are being overrun. Lucas made the hardest decision of his life and activated the general evacuation protocol, even though he knew there was nowhere to evacuate to, and no ships coming to rescue them in time. The Zareth commander, a massive warrior named Vraxis, who had led raiding parties for 30 years, strode through the conquered corridors of the Meridian Hope with contempt curling his lips. He looked at the human defenders who had fallen and sneered at their weakness, because in his culture strength was everything, and these soft creatures had barely slowed his warriors down. Secure all the prey animals. Vraxis spoke in the harsh, clicking language of his people. Separate them by size and health. The strong ones will bring good prices in the outer markets. His warriors moved through the ship with practiced efficiency, hauling terrified humans from hiding places and shelter areas, binding their hands with energy restraints that hummed with power. Commander Kyle Morrison made his last stand in Corridor 12 outside the main civilian shelter, his rifle empty and his sidearm down to 3 rounds. 2 Zareth warriors approached from each direction, and Kyle knew this was where his story ended, but he refused to go down without taking more of these monsters with him. He fired twice and dropped 1 warrior before the others overwhelmed him with sheer physical force, their claws tearing through his uniform and into flesh. Kyle thought about his daughter back on Earth as consciousness faded, and hoped she would grow up in a universe where people remembered that some things were worth dying for. Zareth broke through the shelter door, and Emma's world collapsed into nightmare as armored aliens poured into the cramped space filled with screaming families. Parents tried to shield their children, but the Zareth warriors simply pulled them apart with casual brutality, their strength making human resistance meaningless. Sort them, barked a Zareth officer in broken human standard language. Adults left. Spawn right. Emma felt hands grab her roughly and pull her away from Sophie, who reached out with small arms and cried for Amana with a voice that broke into pure terror. No. No. Please, she's just a baby. Emma fought with desperate strength, but the Zareth holding her barely noticed her struggles. Sophie's scream cut through all other sounds in that shelter. A child's pure expression of fear and abandonment and desperate need for her mother's protection. "Mama!" The sound ripped from Sophie's throat with such force that Emma felt it in her bones, felt it in her soul, and would hear it echoing in her nightmares for the rest of her life, however long that might be. Cry traveled through the ship's corridors and was picked up by the still active distress beacon that Lucas had activated. The signal broadcasting on all emergency frequencies with the automatic message, repeating endlessly into the void. Sophie's terrified scream went out into space, riding on radio waves that moved at the speed of light in all directions. A child's voice crying for help in the infinite darkness. Vraxis heard the crying and laughed. A sound like rocks grinding together in a metal barrel. "Human spawn are always so noisy," he said to his second in command. "No wonder their species is so weak if they coddle their young like this." The Zareth began cataloging their captives with cold efficiency, scanning each human with devices that measured health and estimated market value. Emma and Sophie were separated into different groups. Mother and daughter able to see each other across the shelter, but unable to touch or comfort. Sophie cried herself into hiccuping sobs while Emma stared at her daughter with eyes that promised she would find a way back to her no matter what it took. Other families suffered similar separations as the Zareth divided children from parents and husbands from wives. According to their twisted logic of efficient cargo transport, Captain Lucas Grant was dragged to the bridge where Vraxis had established his command center and forced to kneel before the alien commander. "Your ship is now property of the Zareth Confederacy," Vraxis announced with formal satisfaction. "Your crew and passengers are cargo to be sold at profit. Your resistance was pathetic and your technology laughable." Lucas looked up at the alien with hatred burning in his chest, but said nothing, because words were useless against monsters who saw other living beings as mere merchandise. Humans think they are civilized because they make pretty speeches and sign treaties. Vraxis continued, clearly enjoying his speech. But civilization is an illusion that vanishes the moment real predators arrive. He gestured toward the view screen where Zareth ships were already beginning to move away from the disabled meridian. "Hope, your distress call means nothing because no one will reach you in time, and even if they do, what will they find? An empty ship and a mystery that will never be solved." But Vraxis was wrong because the distress call with Sophie's cry embedded in it was already racing through space toward human military installations and civilian relay stations in the cargo hold where families were being processed and cataloged. A small boy no more than 8 years old looked at his mother with confused eyes. "Mama, why don't the soldiers come? Where are the people who protect us?" His mother had no answer because she was wondering the same thing and praying to every god. She knew that someone somewhere had heard their cry for help. The Zareth finished their inventory and began moving prisoners to their ships in groups of 20, binding them together with magnetic clamps that made walking difficult. Emma managed to stay close enough to Sophie to see her daughter being led away toward a different ship, and the sight nearly broke her completely. "Sophie, Sophie, baby, be brave. Mama will find you." Sophie turned at the sound of her mother's voice, and her small face crumpled into fresh tears, but she nodded with the kind of courage that only children possess. The kind that comes from trusting that parents always keep their promises. The Zareth ships began departing one by one, their cargo holds full of human captives who would be sold like cattle in markets. Across the lawless regions of space, Vraxis left last, ordering his warriors to disable the Meridian, Hope's remaining systems, and leave it drifting as a warning to other human ships about what happened when they traveled through Zareth hunting grounds. The disabled ship floated alone in the darkness, its corridors stained with blood, and its halls echoing with the ghosts of families torn apart. But the distress beacon continued transmitting, and Sophie's cry continued traveling through space, moving toward human ears that would hear it and human hearts that would respond with fury beyond anything that Zareth could imagine. The raiders jumped to faster-than-light speed and vanished into the cosmic void. Confident in their power and their immunity from consequences, they had made the greatest mistake any species could make when, dealing with humanity, they had harmed a child and broadcast the evidence of their crime across the stars. The distress signal from the Meridian Hope reached the relay station at Frontier Post 7 at exactly 0300 hour station time, and a communications officer on duty almost deleted it as another false alarm, but something made her pause and play the message again. Listening past the automated distress code to the sounds embedded in the transmission, her blood turned to ice when she heard it. A child screaming for her mother with such raw terror that the officer had to grip her desk to steady herself. "Oh God," she whispered, and immediately routed the signal to military command on 3 different channels with emergency priority codes at Naval Station Arcturus. Admiral Patricia Collins was reviewing supply requisitions in her office when the priority alert interrupted her work and demanded immediate attention. She played the distress call and listened to the automated message first, her expression neutral and professional as she absorbed the basic information about the attack. Then Sophie's cry filled her office, and Patricia felt something cold and hard settle in her chest like a block of frozen steel that would never melt. The Admiral was a grandmother herself with 2 granddaughters, roughly the same age as the child screaming in that recording. And the sound hit her with physical force. She played it again to be certain she understood what she was hearing, and then a 3rd time because she needed that fury building in her bones to reach critical mass. Patricia picked up her comm unit and began issuing orders in a voice that was calm on the surface but carried undertones of volcanic rage barely contained. "This is Admiral Collins. Scramble all fleet elements immediately. Authorize weapons release protocols. Send recall orders to every ship within 6 jumps of the frontier. I want a full battle group assembled within 12 hours. Her staff officers responded with shocked questions because such massive mobilization hadn't happened since the territorial wars 20 years ago. "Ma'am, what are we responding to?" Patricia sent them the distress call without explanation and waited while they listened, watching their faces change from confusion to cold anger. Zareth raiders attacked the civilian transport and took hostages, including children. She stated the facts with controlled precision. "We're going to retrieve our people and teach these animals why humans don't make good prey." Within 30 minutes, the news had spread through military channels across human space, and the response was instantaneous and overwhelming. Captain Ryan Brooks commanded the destroyer Vengeful Star and was halfway through a routine patrol when he received orders to divert to Arcturus Station at maximum speed. His communications officer forwarded the distress call, and Ryan listened to it standing at attention, as if facing a superior officer, because that child's scream deserved respect and formal acknowledgement. When it finished, Ryan turned to his crew and saw the same expression on every face: cold determination mixed with protective rage. "Helm, plot jump coordinates for Arcturus. Engineering, give me every bit of speed you can squeeze from the engines. Weapons, start running combat drills immediately." The Vengeful Star wasn't alone, as dozens of military vessels across 3 sectors received similar orders and began converging on the assembly point at Planetary Defense Command on Earth. General Andrew Carter watched the situation reports coming in and felt grim satisfaction at the speed of the response. Had fought in enough wars to know that motivation made all the difference in combat effectiveness. And right now, human forces were operating with a level of motivation he had rarely seen. "Sir, we're getting volunteer requests from civilian vessels asking to support the "Operation," reported his aide with barely concealed. Surprise Andrew wasn't surprised at all, because he understood human nature better than most people. Understood that certain things triggered responses that went deeper than logic or self-interest, except the volunteers for support roles only. No combat positions for civilians, but we can use supply ships and medical transports. Lieutenant Nina Chavez sat in the intelligence section at Arcturus Station and coordinated information about Zereth movements. Over the past 6 months, she built a pattern profile using data from 100 sources and began identifying the most likely locations where the raiders would take their captives. They'll head for one of 3 places, she briefed Admiral Collins 12 hours after the initial alert. The slave markets at Carrick Station, the processing center at Void's Edge, or directly to their home territory in the Broken Cluster. Patricia studied the star charts and tactical projections while her assembled fleet grew larger with each passing hour. Ships arrived in groups and took up positions in formation, patterns that hadn't been used in peacetime operations. Battle formations designed for overwhelming force application. The Galactic Council became aware of the human military mobilization when their monitoring stations detected the unusual ship movements. Ambassador Kelthrix of the Vreen Collective sent an urgent message to Earth demanding explanation for what appeared to be preparation for major military action. The human response was brief and cold. Rescue operation for kidnapped civilians. Council notification as courtesy only. Human forces would operate under human authority. Kelthrix tried to invoke treaty obligations and suggest diplomatic solutions, but the humans ignored him completely and continued their preparations. Other species watched with growing concern as the scope of the human response became clear, because nothing in their previous interactions with humanity had prepared them for this level of military mobilization. How many ships are they sending to rescue one transport? Asked a Centauri observer in disbelief. Current count is 270 vessels, with more joining every hour, replied the monitoring station chief. That's insane. The response is completely disproportionate to the offense. But they didn't understand because they hadn't heard Sophie's cry and didn't know about the thing that lived in human hearts, the thing that made them gentle with the weak and terrible toward those who threatened children at Arcturus Station. Admiral Collins stood on the observation deck and watched her armada assemble in the space. Beyond, destroyers and cruisers and battleships hung in formation like predators waiting to be released. Their weapons primed and their crews ready. She had commanded fleets before in exercises and peacetime operations, but had never felt power like this. Never commanded so many ships driven by such a unified purpose. Ryan Rooks brought the Vengeful Star into formation and received his assignment as part of Strike Group Alpha, the tip of the spear that would hit enemy positions first. His crew prepared their weapons with meticulous care and ran simulation after simulation until every firing solution was perfect and every response automatic. In the destroyer's small chapel, crew members who believed in various gods prayed for the safe return of the kidnapped families, while others who believed in nothing prayed anyway because some situations demanded it. Nina Chavez worked without sleep for 18 hours straight, refining intelligence estimates and building target packages. For the fleet commanders, she knew that every minute of delay meant more suffering for the captives, but also knew that rushing in without proper intelligence would get everyone killed. "I've got it," she announced to the command staff as exhaustion tried to pull her under. Fraxis is the raid commander based on ship signature analysis, and he always takes high-value cargo to Void's Edge because he has connections with the auction masters there. Patricia studied the updated intelligence and made her decision with the kind of cold certainty that came from decades of command experience. "We hit Void's Edge with everything we have. She ordered, "Strike Groups Alpha through Delta engage defenses. Groups Echo and Foxtrot perform extraction operations. Medical ships standing by for immediate casualty processing." The fleet began final preparations for the jump to faster-than-light travel. 300 warships preparing to unleash violence on a scale the Xerath had never imagined in the Admiral's ready room. Patricia played Sophie's Cry one final time and let the sound fill her with righteous purpose. She thought about her own granddaughters safe at home and about all the parents in the fleet who were thinking the same thing. "This could have been my child. All ships report ready for jump," announced the operations officer. Patricia stood and walked onto the flag bridge where her staff waited at their stations, every face reflecting the same determination. "Attention all vessels," she broadcast on the fleet-wide channel. "We're going to get our people back, and we're going to send a message that will echo across this galaxy for generations." She paused and let silence fill the channel for 3 heartbeats. "No one touches our children and lives to profit from it. No one takes our families and escapes justice. And no one will ever mistake human kindness for weakness again." The crews across 300 ships responded with grim acknowledgement because they understood what was coming and accepted it completely. "Fleet jump on my mark." Patricia gave the final order and counted down from 5 at 0. The entire Armada vanished from normal space in a flash of twisted light and began racing toward the Xerath at speeds that defied conventional physics. The message had been received and the response was coming. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when humans heard a child cry for help. The Galactic Council convened in emergency session 3 days after the human assault on Void's Edge, and the chamber buzzed with agitated conversations in a dozen languages. Ambassador Kelthrix called the meeting to order with visible frustration, because humanity had acted unilaterally and with overwhelming force in a way that violated numerous treaties and protocols. The human military action was excessive and dangerous. He began his prepared statement. "The deployment of 300 warships to rescue a single civilian transport sets a dangerous precedent for future conflicts." The other ambassadors murmured agreement because they were accustomed to conflicts being resolved through negotiation and carefully measured responses. Then, Admiral Patricia Collins entered the chamber in full dress uniform with her medals gleaming and her expression carved from stone. She walked to the speaking platform without ceremony and activated the holographic display that showed the assembled delegates. "Honorable members of the Galactic Council," Patricia began with icy politeness, "I am here to present evidence of crimes committed by Xerath raiders against human civilians and to explain the human response." She played the distress call from the Meridian Hope and let the automated message fill the chamber first. Then Sophie's cry echoed through the hall, and Patricia watched the delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. "That is the sound of a 6-year-old child being torn from her mother's arms by slavers," Patricia stated with deadly calm. "That is the sound that 300 human warships heard and responded to." She brought up tactical data showing the scale of Xerath slaving operations over the past decade. "Our investigation of Void's Edge revealed evidence of systematic slave trafficking involving thousands of victims from multiple species, including humans, Centauri, Vreen, and others represented in this chamber." The delegates looked at each other with dawning realization because the Xerath had been operating with impunity for years, and no one had taken action. "We recovered 217 non-human captives during our operation," Patricia continued. "Citizens of worlds that are members of this council who were abandoned to suffer while you debated proper diplomatic channels." Ambassador Kelthrix tried to interrupt, but Patricia cut him off with a gesture. "The human position is simple and non-negotiable. We will protect our civilians with whatever force is necessary, and we will not apologize for doing so effectively." She brought up footage from the rescue operation showing Marines carrying out children and reuniting families. You call our response excessive." Patricia's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "I call it proportional to the crime of kidnapping children for sale into slavery." Centauri delegate stood and spoke with unusual emotion. "The Admiral is correct. My government has been trying to address Xerath raiding through diplomatic means for 5 years with no results. Humanity accomplished in 3 days what we could not achieve in years." Other delegates began voicing support, and Kelthrix realized the political winds were shifting against his position. Patricia played her final card by bringing up Vraxis in a holding cell aboard the Righteous Fury. "This is the Xerath commander who led the raid on the Meridian Hope," she stated. "He and his crew will face trial under human military law for crimes including kidnapping, assault, and attempted trafficking of minors. You cannot claim jurisdiction over non-human criminals," protested Kelthrix weakly. "We claim jurisdiction over anyone who harms human civilians," Patricia responded with absolute certainty. "And we will exercise that jurisdiction anywhere we find such criminals operating." The council chamber erupted in arguments and counter-arguments, but Patricia had made her point, and the balance of power in the galaxy had shifted. She left the council to their debates and returned to her fleet where real work was being done. Ryan Brooks supervised the interrogation of captured Xerath, and the intelligence picture that emerged was disturbing. The bush slave trade was far larger than anyone had suspected, with operations spanning dozens of systems and involving criminal networks from multiple species. "We've identified at least 15 other major slaving operations," reported Lieutenant Nina Chavez as she compiled the data. Void's Edge was just one node in a massive network. Admiral Collins studied the intelligence reports and made a decision that would define her career and possibly alter galactic politics for generations. "We don't stop," she announced to her senior staff. "We identified the other operations, so we hit them all. We dismantled this entire network and sent a message that slavery will not be tolerated anywhere near human space." Her officers agreed immediately because the mission had taken on a life of its own and become something larger than just rescuing one ship's passengers. The human fleet split into task forces and began systematic operations against slaving outposts across the frontier regions. Each operation followed the same pattern: overwhelming force, precise targeting, complete destruction of slaving infrastructure, and rescue of all captives regardless of species. The galaxy watched with growing amazement as humans demonstrated military capability that no one had suspected they possessed. Species that had dismissed humanity as minor players in galactic affairs suddenly reassessed their strategic calculations on Earth. Public opinion strongly supported the military action, and volunteers flooded recruitment centers wanting to join the fight against slavers. Emma and Sophie reached Haven Colony aboard a military transport with full honors and found Sophie's father waiting at the landing pad exactly as Emma had promised. He scooped Sophie up and held both his girls while tears ran down his face. "I heard what happened. I heard your cry, baby girl, and I knew they would come for you." Sophie clung to her father and finally let herself believe that the nightmare was truly over. The colony leadership decided to rename their settlement in honor of Commander Kyle Morrison, who had died protecting civilians on the Meridian Hope. Morrison's Rest became the official name, and a memorial was built in the central square, showing a soldier standing guard over children at play 3 months after the initial raid. Admiral Collins returned to Earth and was summoned to appear before civilian government leaders. She expected reprimand for the scale of her military action, but instead received commendation and promotion to Fleet Admiral with expanded authority. "What you did out there changed everything," the Secretary of Defense told her privately. "The galaxy sees us differently now, and that's not a bad thing." Patricia accepted the promotion, but felt no pride, because she had simply done what needed doing. The Xerath, as a political entity, ceased to exist after human forces dismantled their military infrastructure and occupied their home systems. Vraxis and 200 other slaving operation leaders faced trial in human courts and were convicted of crimes against sentient beings. The sentences were harsh, and the executions were broadcast across the galaxy as a warning to anyone considering similar crimes. But the real change was subtler and more profound than military victories or political reorganization. Every species that traveled the space lanes began to understand that humans were not weak, despite their preference for peaceful solutions. Pirates and raiders learned to avoid ships flying human flags or carrying human passengers. The phrase, "They have human children aboard," became a warning that meant stay far away, unless you wanted to face overwhelming retaliation. Sophie grew up on Haven Colony and became a teacher working with young children from multiple species. She never forgot what happened, but she chose to focus on building a better future rather than dwelling on past trauma. On her 25th birthday, she visited the memorial in Morrison's Rest and stood looking at the statue of the soldier protecting children. A young Marine was there paying respects, and Sophie struck up a conversation. "Did you know Commander Morrison?" the Marine asked. "He saved my life." Sophie replied simply, "He died holding the line so that children like me would have a chance." The Marine nodded with understanding. "I joined because of what happened to the Meridian Hope, because I heard you cry and wanted to make sure no child would have to go through that again." Sophie smiled, because this was the legacy of that terrible day. A galaxy where children could grow up safer, because humanity had proven willing to fight for them. Admiral Collins retired after 10 years of service, restructuring human military doctrine around the principle of overwhelming response to crimes against civilians. Her final speech to graduating officers at the Naval Academy became legendary. "We are not conquerors seeking empire," she told the young officers. "We are protectors defending the vulnerable, and there is no more honorable calling in the universe." The graduating class stood and applauded for 5 full minutes while Patricia allowed herself to feel satisfaction at what they had built in the Galactic Council chambers. Ambassador Kelthrix gave a speech acknowledging that human intervention had forced the galaxy to confront the slavery problem it had been ignoring. "We were comfortable in our diplomatic processes and lost sight of the victim's suffering while we debated proper procedure," he admitted. "Humanity reminded us that some evils cannot be negotiated with and must be confronted directly." The Council passed sweeping anti-slavery legislation backed by human military power and other species, contributed forces to ongoing enforcement operations. Void's Edge was dismantled completely, and its materials were recycled to build a hospital station that would serve frontier regions. Void's Edge hung in space like a tumor on the body of civilization, a massive station built from salvaged ships and stolen materials where the worst elements of a dozen species conducted business beyond the reach of law. Raxus brought his ships into dock with satisfaction warming his chest because this raid had been profitable, and the human cargo would fetch premium prices from buyers who valued exotic slaves. The station's auction masters greeted him with the kind of respect reserved for reliable suppliers and began processing the captives with efficient brutality. Emma was dragged from the transport ship along with 50 other adults, her wrists bound and her mind numb with trauma. But her eyes never stopped searching for Sophie among the other groups being unloaded. Sophie and the other children were taken to a separate processing area where they would be cataloged and prepared for sale, their small faces streaked with tears and their voices calling out for parents who couldn't reach them. "The young ones always sell quickly," commented one of the Zareth handlers with casual cruelty. "Wealthy buyers across the sector like human children for servants because they're easy to train when taken young." Sophie huddled with 3 other children in a corner of the holding cell and tried to be brave like Mama had told her. But the fear was so big, it felt like it would swallow her whole 200 million kilometers away. The human armada dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. and their sensors immediately painted voids. Edge with targeting data Admiral Patricia Collins sat in her command chair aboard the flagship Righteous Fury and studied the tactical display. With cold assessment, the station bristled with defensive weapons and was surrounded by 50 Zereth warships of various classes. A formidable force by any standard calculation. All ships. This is Admiral Collins. She broadcast on all channels, including the public frequencies that Void's Edge would be monitoring. Surrender the human captives immediately, and you will be allowed to survive. Her message reached the station, and Vraxis listened to it with disbelief, turning to amusement because humans simply didn't do this. Didn't threaten force, didn't project power. Ignore them. He ordered the station commander. Humans are weak and won't actually fight. They'll negotiate, and we can demand concessions. The station commander wasn't so certain because he could see the size of the human fleet on his sensors, and had never heard of humans assembling such force. Maybe we should consider their demands. Vraxis struck him across the face with enough force to draw blood, and reasserted his authority. I have raided human ships for 10 years, and they always back down. Always negotiate. Always choose peaceful solutions, even when violence would serve them better. He opened the communication channel to the human fleet and sneered into the camera. Your cargo is already processed and will be sold within the hour. If you want them back, you can bid at the auction like everyone else. Now leave before we add your ships to our salvage inventory. Patricia listened to his response and felt no anger because anger was too hot, and what she felt was cold as the space between stars. Weapons free, she said quietly. Eliminate all hostile forces. Marines prepare for boarding operations. Medical teams stand by. The human fleet opened fire with coordinated precision that spoke of countless hours of training and absolute unity of purpose. Missiles and energy beams tore through space and struck Zereth ships with devastating accuracy. Shields collapsed under sustained bombardment and hulls ruptured in silent explosions. The Zereth tried to respond, but their ships had been positioned for intimidation, not combat, and the humans had planned this assault with meticulous care. Ryan Brooks commanded the Vengeful Star into the heart of the enemy formation, and his weapons officer called out target. Solutions with mechanical efficiency. Target locked. Firing. The destroyer's main gun spoke in pulses of coherent light that burned through a Zereth cruiser's armor and detonated its reactor in a burst of radiation that lit up the darkness. Next target. The battle lasted 11 minutes from first shot to final enemy ship disabled or destroyed. 11 minutes of overwhelming force application that shattered the Zereth defensive line completely. Void's Edge itself took damage to its weapons batteries as human ships systematically destroyed anything that could threaten the boarding parties. Station is neutralized, reported the tactical officer with grim satisfaction. Launch Marine assault teams. Find our people and bring them home. Dropships and boarding pods descended on the station from a dozen directions at once, carrying Marines in full combat armor who moved with deadly purpose. Lieutenant Nina Chavez rode in the lead boarding pod alongside 20 Marines from the Vengeful Star's complement. Her intelligence briefing had placed the holding cells in Section 9, and that's where they were headed. The pod hit the station's hull and cut through with plasma torches. The Marines poured through the breach with weapons ready and found themselves facing Zereth guards who had been confident in their safety. Minutes ago, the firefight was brief and brutal. Human weapons designed for maximum stopping power against large targets tore through Zereth guards like they were made of paper. Mina followed the Marines through corridors marked with alien symbols that she had studied in her briefing materials. Turning left at intersection 7 and descending 2 levels, they encountered more resistance, but nothing that could stop disciplined soldiers fighting for a cause they believed in with every fiber of their being. The holding cells appeared ahead, and the Marine squad leader began cutting through the locks with precision charges that blew. The doors opened in sequence. Emma looked up when the first door exploded inward and saw human soldiers in armor marked with Earth's flag and felt hope. For the first time in days, U.S. Marines, you're safe now. We're here to take you home. The Marine's voice was muffled by his helmet, but the words were the most beautiful thing Emma had ever heard. My daughter, Sophie, she's in the children's section. Please, we're getting everyone, ma'am. I promise. Another Marine team breached the children's holding area and found Sophie pressed against the wall with her small arms wrapped around a boy even younger than herself. The team leader, a sergeant named Christina Burke, removed her helmet so the children could see her face and knelt down to their level. Hey kids, my name is Christina, and we're here to take you back to your families. Sophie looked at her with huge eyes that held too much fear for someone so young. Are you real? Very real, sweetheart. We heard you call for help, and we came as fast as we could. Sophie started crying again, but these were different tears. Tears of relief and release after days of terror. I want my mama. We're going to find her right now. I promise. Christina picked up Sophie and carried her while other Marines gathered the rest of the children. Some walking on their own, and others too traumatized to do anything but be carried. The extraction teams moved through the station with brutal efficiency, breaking into every holding cell and processing center, finding not just humans, but captives from half a dozen species who had been awaiting Sale A. Marine Captain found a group of Centauri civilians who had been captured 6 months earlier, and their gratitude was almost overwhelming. Thank you. Thank you. We thought no one would come. We came for our people, but we're not leaving anyone behind. The evacuation proceeded with organized chaos as medical teams triaged, rescued captives, and Marines secured every section of the station against resistance that had mostly evaporated. Vraxis tried to escape to his ship, but found it disabled by human weapons fire and surrounded by Marine boarding parties. He fought with desperate fury, but human soldiers had trained for combat against species far more dangerous than Zareth, and they took him alive despite his resistance. Admiral Collins received regular updates from the station as her Marines completed their mission. All human captives accounted for and secure. We've also recovered 217 non-human prisoners who were awaiting sale. Bring everyone up to the medical ships for processing. Post guards on all Zareth prisoners and prepare them for transport to holding facilities. Patricia allowed herself a small moment of satisfaction because the operation had succeeded with minimal friendly casualties and all objectives achieved. Ryan Brooks watched from the Vengeful Stars bridge as evacuation ships began ferrying rescued captives up to the larger vessels equipped with medical facilities. He saw children being carried out wrapped in emergency blankets and felt the tension that had been driving him for days finally begin to ease him. One of the medical transports. Emma sat on a hospital bed while a doctor checked her for injuries when she heard a phonger's commotion in the corridor. The door opened and Christina Burke walked in carrying Sophie, who saw her mother and started crying and reaching out with desperate hands. Mama! Mama! Emma grabbed her daughter and pulled her close, sobbing into Sophie's hair, while the little girl clung to her with the strength of someone who had been certain they would never feel safe again. I've got you, baby. I've got you. You're safe now. Christina watched the reunion with tears in her own eyes, because this was why they had come. This moment right here made every risk worthwhile across the medical ships. Similar reunions were happening as families were brought back together and the nightmare began to end. But Admiral Collins knew the mission wasn't finished because justice hadn't been served yet, and The galaxy needed to understand what happened when you hurt human children.